Engage Waldo online forum for the candidates for the Democratic nomination for the state Senate seat from Waldo County. I'm Trudy Miller of Engage Waldo, and we are a local grassroots group with members from Belfast, Northport, Searsport, Searsmont, and Lincolnville. We've been together over 3 years, and we do a variety of things to educate the community and to promote more progressive candidates and legislation at the state and federal levels. We have worked on campaigning, we've organized rallies, we've lobbied in Augusta, and we visited legislative offices, among other things. This will be the third forum that we have done for Democratic primary candidates, but this is the first time we've done it on Zoom, so this is new to us. And I want to say I have heard that Zoom has had major widespread outages today, so I certainly hope that doesn't happen. If it does, that's it, we can't do anything about it. We're recording this forum for viewing later on for people who can't attend right now. Engage Waldo is not officially affiliated with any party organization, but we tend to promote Democrats in keeping with our political orientation. We have been and will again be the Waldo County Volunteer Corps group for the Jared Golden campaign, and we also will be working on getting out the vote for all the Democratic candidates up and down the ballot. We'd love for you to join us. You can reach us at engagewaldo@gmail.com. The Democratic primary for state and federal offices, except the presidency, will be held on July 14th this year. If you're registered as a Democrat, we strongly urge you to vote. And if you're not registered, you can register at the polls or in advance. If you don't need to register in person at the polls, we strongly urge you to vote early by mail for your own safety and for that of others. Our moderator we've asked is Sara Salley, who's the chair of the Waldo County Democratic Party. She will introduce the candidates and we'll talk about the format for the discussion. So I'm going to take myself off camera and it's all Sara from now on. Here you go, Sara.
Thank you, Trudy. I'm very pleased to be here and very grateful that you've organized this forum. We have 3 candidates running for the Democratic nomination for the state Senate seat in District 11, which encompasses all of Waldo County. Those candidates are Charlie Pattavina, Chip Curry, and Robyn Stanicki. Welcome, candidates, and thank you for participating in today's forum. This is a time of crisis in our community, a time when good leadership is more important than ever. We recognize that campaigning in the midst of a pandemic is very challenging, and we appreciate that you want to serve your community in the legislature this way. Welcome also to everybody who is watching the forum from home. We're glad you could be here with us today. I will go over the ground rules for the forum and then we'll begin. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement to introduce themselves to you, to the audience. Then I will present the questions one by one. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each question. If one candidate in their response mentions another candidate specifically, the other candidate may have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Each candidate will answer each question, so everyone's going to be answering the same questions. I will call on candidates to answer each question in turn, and we'll change the order that candidates are called on from question to question. We'll go through as many questions as we have time for, leaving room at the end for each candidate to give a 1-minute closing statement. Our timekeeper is Mayo Bullock, who is also on the screen today. She will hold up a green card when the candidate's time starts. And then when there are 30 seconds remaining in the time allowed for your statement or answer, Mayo will hold up a yellow 30-second warning card. At the end of that 30 seconds, she will hold up a red card, meaning that your time is at an end. Although we are not able to take questions from the audience today, the public was invited to suggest questions ahead of time. The final questions have been determined by Engage Waldo. The order of the opening statements was by random drawing. Charlie Pattavina will give his opening statement first, followed by Chip Curry, and then Robyn Stanicki. Closing statements will be in the same order. Candidates, do you have any questions about the forum?
Nope, thank you.
Mayo, are you all set? Okay, Charlie Pattavina, please go ahead with your 3-minute opening statement.
All right, thanks. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to my kitchen. A few of you have been here before, but mostly via Zoom. So thanks for hosting us today on what actually looks like the most beautiful day so far, and for sharing your questions about what's on your minds. I'm in Maine by choice, having grown up in the Boston area. I went to the public schools in Braintree, then I went to BC High, BC, and the BU School of Medicine. None of those are related to each other. And I'm an emergency physician working part-time now. And as you probably know, emergency medicine is really all about the community. I also describe myself as a recovering administrator, having almost always been in charge of some kind of department or division throughout my career, taking care of the community and taking care of the people who take care of the community. After training, I paid back a Navy scholarship with service at Subic Bay in the Philippines and Newport, Rhode Island. I have 3 children, 5 grandchildren, 3 very recent grandchildren, and 1 I haven't been able to meet yet, actually. I was at Brown for over 20 years in Providence, teaching, and I became the department chief there. Spent a lot of time with doing state and federal advocacy, saw us through a lot of change, and during that time I served on the National Board of the American College of Emergency Physicians, which has 43,000 members, and we have term limits too. Then I was in Worcester for a couple of years, bringing together physicians in a multi-specialty group, a hospital, and an emergency department before I was recruited to St. Joe's in 2008, where they badly needed modernization of their department. And it took about 10 years, but I was able to complete it, and I'm just so proud of the people who work there now. And, you know, kindness and excellence are routine. And I'm so proud of how they're dealing with the COVID-19 crisis right now. Currently, I work on average about 1 day a week in the ED. I had my hours cut a little too. And I work every Wednesday in a low barrier opioid recovery clinic where, you know, homeless is rampant and becoming more of a problem by the day. My issues are first and foremost to represent your interests. Some overarching concerns of mine are civility, not just in politics, but in daily life. I think we need to stop shouting at each other and work together. And fairness in government, you know, the government has to work for all of us. Certainly now, the economy would have been an issue anyway because we would have seen a downturn at some point, but now it's a huge issue. We need to get back to having jobs and thriving businesses. Healthcare, which is affordable for all, is a big issue. Climate change and the huge economic opportunity that it presents to us. Income inequality, we're keeping neighbors in poverty. There's, you know, unnecessary suffering going on. Certainly broadband internet, which has to be affordable, and there are many other things. But now it looks like we'll be dealing with the pandemic into next year too. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Chip Curry, would you please present your 3-minute opening statement?
Sure, thank you very much. I appreciate it, especially, you know, it's hard to connect with people right now, given we can't be knocking on doors, which is typical. And so thank you for having this forum, and I see that we have at least 51 attendees, so that's outstanding. I really appreciate it. I've been in Waldo County for about 25 years. I originally moved up to the Unity area, and where I worked at Unity College, and I taught leadership, first in the context of outdoor recreation, then in the context of community and community service leadership. I've worked there for about 7 years. I'll just start out this with a bit of a bio or a resume. Worked there for about 7 years, and then I started employment with the Governor's Children's Cabinet, where I worked under the Muskie School of Public Service on increasing outcomes for children and youth across the state. And so our mission was to support community-led efforts to increase outcomes at early childhood all the way through young adulthood. And I did that by leading a 40-person team of AmeriCorps volunteers. We did that for about 10 years, working with a few hundred nonprofit organizations, school districts across the state. I was very proud to work on that project. I worked under, it was first Governor King, and then Governor Baldacci's children's cabinet. I left that work and then went on to working with adult students, and I work with the University of Maine system over at what is affectionately called URock, so it's the UMA Rockland Center, and I work with adult students who are going back to school, seeking the skills and credentials they need to get the jobs that will pay the bills. And that's a core value that I have is having an economy that is strong enough where there are jobs that pay the bills and people can work hard and make a difference and serve and take care of their families. That is always been a challenge here in Waldo County. I am in great respect of the people that make it here. They have true grit and creativity and entrepreneurship, but so often our youth have to leave in order to make a difference. And in order to make it, not just make a difference, but to make it and to have lives and have jobs that pay the bills. So I want them to be able to be here. I want my daughter to be able to be here and have a choice. I guess I'll wrap up with my big issues, which is obviously that's the economy. We're going to be focusing on stabilizing our economy after this response, and we're going to have to be listening a lot and seeing where it's working and where it's not and reacting and responding. Lastly, I want to focus on the climate change issues that we will be facing because it's a predictable issue and we need to be addressing that both in preventing the worst outcomes and preparing for the outcomes that we already cannot prevent. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Robyn, Stanicki, we are ready for your 3-minute opening statement, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. I am Robyn Stanicki. I am one of the candidates for Maine State Senate. I grew up in Oxford County. Unlike Charlie, not by choice, I did not come to Maine. I was actually born in Waltham, Mass, so I am your neighbor. And I entered the foster care system when I was about 4 years old. I encountered a childhood that was just full of instability and poverty, and that continued until I was a young adult. In fact, I really struggled as a teenager to understand how to just really function, and I was chronically homeless, and I had a hard time supporting myself and keeping a job. I just barely managed to graduate high school, in fact. And so when I graduated from high school, I did not have a plan for what was going to happen next. I spent 10 years as a military spouse. I worked for the US Army as a medical technician. And so then I came home to Maine. I was a single mom of 3. And so I began serving veterans that adjust to life after deployment. It's very difficult for folks who are coming home from war. These are combat vets who have a lot of very real issues. So we helped them. Specifically, I led the charge in helping Maine veterans understand their education benefits and what choices they could make to get the education and training that complemented their military service and be able to make a life in the civilian world. I actually encountered a job loss while working for the VA. They cut my position across the nation, and so I had an opportunity to go back to school and earn my degree. But I really struggled in college, and I just could not seem to manage my competing priorities of both being a mom and also being a full-time student while also working. So I had to fall out of school. We called it stepping out of school, and I did that a couple of times while I really struggled. Eventually, I was accepted into a very small state retraining program run by the Department of Labor, and I graduated from the University of Maine with not 1 but 2 degrees in only 3 years. I was really impacted by this program, and I really felt like it made a huge, it just changed the trajectory of my life. And so I sought to really make an impact with others in helping them get their education. So I turned around And I enrolled in graduate school, and I started studying higher education and human development because I felt that there was a relationship between my educational attainment and my experience in foster care. And understanding the way that trauma impacts the way that we're able to make decisions in adulthood really can explain some of the reasons why we all have the living conditions that we see in Waldo County. I'm fully independent right now, and I'm able to support my family, and I work as a clinical researcher and a healthcare quality improvement specialist. So I actually look at the way that we do things and the outcomes we receive in light of our intentions. I think that this is a great skill to bring to leadership and to lawmaking, because honestly, sometimes we pass really well-meaning policies and we pass them, but we forget that in implementation, we're losing. I apologize, am I out of time?
Yes, sorry.
I apologize, I can see the red now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates, all of you. We are ready to begin with our questions. Robyn Stanicki, you will be answering the first question first, followed by Chip Curry and then Charlie Pattavina. Question 1 is, do you support the proposed legislation to form a Maine Power Authority, which would move the distribution of electricity from CMP and Emera to a consumer-owned nonprofit utility? Why or why not? Robyn Stanicki, go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. This is a great question, and it's something I'm learning a little bit more about. I'm actually one of the customers that was dissatisfied with Central Maine Power's rollout of the new billing system, and I encountered a significant increase in my electric bills. As a single mother, I was paying $100 or about $150 for my electric service, which I felt was reasonable. To receive a $900 bill immediately after receiving a $150 bill was really concerning to me. And I know that it was concerning and alarming to many people who simply cannot absorb an increase, an unexplained increase of that amount. So I worked really hard to try to figure out how I could solve this issue myself as a consumer working with this company. After a year and $4,000 worth of bills, I still don't have this problem solved. One of the proposals that we've seen is a consumer-owned utility, and I did attend an informational session that was held by Seth Berry and some of our other local representatives that explained this proposal that will give us a little bit more autonomy and authority over how our electric services are delivered. I think that this could be a good idea, but I'd like to learn more.
Thank you. Chip Curry, would you like me to repeat the question?
Sure.
Do you support the proposed legislation to form a Maine Power Authority, which would move the distribution of electricity from CMP and Emera to a consumer-owned nonprofit utility? Why or why not? Go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I am intrigued and excited by the idea, but I haven't seen the specific legislation or been able to dive into the details of it. So in concept, I really like it, and I like it for a couple of reasons. I believe for us to be able to really get at issues of climate change, to really get at, and what I'm talking about is we need to shift, we need to generate far more renewables, specifically in solar and wind. To do that, we can't be sending all the profits to Spain, which is where the CMP's ownership is. So, and they haven't expressed really any interest yet in investing in renewable energy here. So I think we have tremendous capacity. We have outstanding natural resources in solar and wind, yet we're not able to leverage that. And what I would be very interested in finding out is, if we can use it, if this model will allow us to push those investments here in Maine, so that we become not just able to take care of our own energy needs, shifting more and more into electricity that is renewable, and we know not all renewables are the same, so we're talking about solar and wind, so that we can grow that so that we can meet Governor Mills's targets. So I would be very intrigued about that. I haven't seen all the details, and I haven't been able to really see where the downsides are and what that process would be. or what so I feel like it's an incomplete evaluation on my part, so I want to dive in further.
Okay, thank you. Charlie Pattavina, you are next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. So the answer is yes, but with the caveat that I would like to learn, I do need to see the specifics, as Chip said most recently. But I actually grew up under a community-owned utility in Braintree, Massachusetts. By the way, Robyn, did you say, were you at that meeting in Searsport on Friday the 13th? Because we didn't know what each other looked like then, but Rachel had told me you were there. But but I know you've learned about this. So yeah, for those who remember, back during the Great Northeast Blackout of God knows when that was, I think maybe in the late 60s, the entire eastern seaboard went out. And Braintree, Massachusetts, we still had power and we had to go to school. But my sister still lives there, and she says, you know, they pay less than the surrounding towns, which I think are under National Grid, and they have fewer blackouts. And, you know, I think it deserves exploration. It would obviously require a, you know, fair deal for the current owners of the systems. But, you know, as Chip says, anytime, whether it's health insurance, drug companies, whatever, anytime you have an investor-owned entity, there has to be money paid to the shareholders because they, you know, reasonably expect to make money.
Thank you.
Thank
Our
Hey,
next question is about the climate crisis. The climate crisis is having a profound effect on Maine. What are the effects of climate change that concern you the most? What specific policies would you support in the Maine legislature to address the climate crisis in Maine? Chip Curry, you will go first. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I feel like I got into that just a little bit, but I'll go further on that. So the challenges I think we face are I trust the scientists, and I trust that the next generation, we're not even looking that far out before we see pretty significant impacts to us, both in terms of variation and storms that are not predictable, just incredible. You know, if we think this pandemic has been a challenge, we're going to see more and more economic devastation and devastation to life and property. So we need to be dealing with it. And it's just in way you prepare for the future. You leave the world better off for the next generation. How are we doing this? I think we can all agree that we want this to be a viable place in 20, 30, 40 years. And we need to be working on that. It is an existential threat to us. And so how do we do that? The biggest issue, where does most of our energy come from in terms of, is when we look at transportation and home heating. And so we've got to find ways to get at converting our heating into electricity that can be renewable. And we've got to find ways to make this socially just, because it can't just be that if you have a lot of money, you can convert your house to it. How do we do this to really make it at scale? And so we've got to find ways to do that. There's tremendous need for renewable energy. And I think this is also an opportunity for us to grow green jobs. And that's where we can be increasing and even exporting renewable energy from Maine. It could be a place that we have a win-win. We are solving climate issues, and we are also employing people in well-paying green jobs.
Thank you. Charlie Pattavina, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thanks. Thanks for the question. No, I haven't heard anything I don't agree with so far. Yeah, you know, as with any adversity, this is a huge opportunity. And unfortunately, we don't have much leadership from the federal government at this point. So the state role is key. And a lot of national legislation is actually being modeled after state legislation. As you probably know, Governor Mills created the Maine Climate Council along with the legislature shortly after taking office. And it has an ambitious set of goals and timeline, especially compared with other states. It's following the recommendations of the International Panel on Climate Change. And there are 5 or 6 working groups right now that involve industry, environmental groups, academics, and so on. And as far as I know, the public is able to participate in those things as well. And their task is to report back to the Climate Council to make recommendations by the end of the year. So your next senator will be seeing these things, and we have to make sure they're, economically beneficial and that we can do it. And as Chip said, home heating and transportation are two areas we need to decarbonize and electrify, and we need to increase Maine's electric output by about 5 times what it is now. And that's a $65 billion opportunity for the economy, if we invest in it properly. So I think we can do both. We can benefit the economy, and we can address this change, not just in terms of mitigation, but, it's an issue that, except for the last couple of months that were kind of cool while nobody was using a whole lot of energy, it's an issue that sometimes it's easy to think we can't do anything, but I'm optimistic that we can.
Thank you. Robyn Stanicki, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thanks. I'd like to answer this question in 2 ways. As a concerned citizen and someone who's raising a family in Waldo County, I'm concerned about our climate and the world that we're leaving for our children. And I think that there are ways that all of us individually can make changes to our behavior that really can make an impact on our state. Now, Maine is really unique in the fact that climate change and the environment really has an effect on our industries and our landscapes, because we really depend on the temperatures of the waters to be just the right number in order to be able to have sustainable aquaculture projects and to be able to have a flourishing commercial fisherman industry. So I think that it's really important to think about the ways that it will uniquely impact Maine and the ways that we can mitigate these impacts, not only to our economy, but thinking about the environment as well. I really like some of the ideas around renewable energy, and I really want to explore ways that we can use wind energy the same way that I've seen in other countries. I traveled abroad and I saw these beautiful, what I call beautiful, offshore wind farms that I think would be a great solution to explore, to think about the ways that we can use the fact that we're a coastal state and that we can use our coastal waters to potentially have renewable energy. Another really, and I know I have 30 seconds, a really piece of low-hanging fruit that I think that we can offer the state of Maine is normalizing the use of electric vehicles. And not just for the person that can afford a Tesla, but if we make this idea popular, simply by putting charging stations in great number across the state, we can make this accessible and affordable for people to be driving electric cars and reducing our carbon footprint that way.
Thank you. The third question is this. In light of pandemic-related diminished revenue to the state, what changes and challenges do you foresee to the state budget? Are there any holy grail or line in the sand items that you would not cut no matter what? Charlie Pattavina, you are answering this question first. Go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks. So if I understood you right, I think you're asking, in light of the pandemic expenditures, what non-pandemic things would we not cut?
In light of the diminished revenue, the pandemic-related diminished revenue,
yeah.
what challenges do you see to the state budget? And are there any items that you would not cut?
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't print money the way the federal government does. But certainly, I think some lessons we've learned over the last 8 years, or I should say the 8 years ending a year and a half ago, there are some things that just can't be cut, including the public health infrastructure. One of the reasons we are still playing catch up and don't have the ability, or just barely now have the ability, to do contact tracing is because so many state agencies were just emasculated, including child welfare agencies. Even though I know, Governor LePage had a strong passion for, child welfare, given his own compelling story. while he wanted to put healthcare workers in jail for not reporting things, but then he didn't support the infrastructure to actually help prevent and deal with these problems. So I would say, education, a lot of these things, pay for themselves or give payback, like roads, healthcare. I would not do anything to diminish the Medicaid program. We get at least half of that money back from the federal government. Thankfully, we have the Medicaid expansion now. It's certainly there will have to be scrutiny paid because revenues will be decreased. But I also give the legislature credit for not spending all the extra revenue we've had in the last couple of years. We've funded some important things, but have not, but have saved some. So I have to say, mostly I'd have to take a hard look at that along with everybody else. And I do think Maine has a great bipartisan and bicameral budgeting process that hopefully we can agree on, as people have been able to agree on things again recently.
Thank you. Robyn Stanicki, you are next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. If I were to address the needs that this budget deficit would create, it would be hard pressed for me to identify one thing that I would say we need to hold fast to. But I think I do agree with Charlie that our healthcare infrastructure is incredibly important. Our social safety net would be number 2 on my list. I think it's incredibly important to keep these programs that support families. But I would first and foremost not want to compromise anything in our budget. We're already tapped out and we already have needs that we can't manage. We need to take our plight to the federal government and have them help us solve our problems. And not just for governors or states that participate in a way that someone in power may prefer them to act. We all need to have an equitable and fair distribution of resources so that we can meet needs that are challenging, unprecedented, and incredibly difficult to make cuts where we really simply cannot stand to make cuts anymore. With regard to child welfare, I think it's important to recognize that in Waldo County, we have had a 2-fold increase in the amount of child welfare cases that have been reported from 2017 to 2018 even. We have an incredible child and adolescent mental health crisis that we're battling. And these are real issues for real people that are going to have implications long after the pandemic, long after these budget crises. And we simply cannot make these kinds of sacrifices for our families. So I think it's going to be incredibly challenging to balance a budget, and we're simply going to have to levy pressure on the federal government to help all of us equally. And that's the right answer to do.
Thank you. Chip Curry, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, that's all right. Thank you. So, I have friends who are working school budgets and working college, university budgets, and everyone's looking very closely at all of these things, trying to figure out what is essential and what they can cut. Obviously, I believe, as much as possible, we need to be lobbying to have more resources come in, to have bonds. We might need to be borrowing in order to invest in our people right now, because there are some things that if we don't spend on right now will come back and haunt us but in terms of later expenses. Right now we're having a renewed crisis in the opioid crisis. This pandemic we're seeing more deaths now, and I foresee that we will continue to see deaths this year outpacing last year. So the opioid crisis is not in our rear view mirror, even though it's not on the news every day. And so we need to be investing in that. We need to be investing in our social safety net programs. We can't tell people shelter at home, and by the way, the programs aren't working, and so you can't shelter at home. You can't stay home. You've got to go out and find work and engage, where that's just setting us up for divisiveness and for a second round or a third round of this pandemic. So I think there will be some level of borrowing. I think there will be a lot of lobbying in order to have investment in the area. I mean, I see us at a scope of New Deal era level of what, of investment so that we can be putting people to work, so that people can survive this. Right now, our focus is going to be on survival, and then it's recovery.
Thank you. The fourth question is, the National Popular Vote Compact is a measure that would, if passed by states that represent at least 270 electoral college votes, would ensure that the president who wins a majority of the popular vote across the country would be elected. The measure will no doubt be submitted in the next legislative session. How would you vote on the National Popular Vote Compact? And please explain your position. Robyn, Stanicki, you have this question first. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And this is a great question. Unfortunately, the compact issue is not something I know a lot about. But what I do know a little bit about is elections and making them fair. I think that the Electoral College has been a hotly debated issue, and we're often misunderstanding the role that it plays. It is incredibly unfair to see our electoral system and the way that it is rigged so that different parties can get support based on the demographics of an area. It can be incredibly challenging to feel as though you, in your one voter casting a ballot, really does count. The Electoral College does prevent this idea of very populated locales having a larger impact on our elections than rural places. And I think that Maine can be incredibly impacted by a rule such as this, because we are rural and we would not have as effective representation in our federal legislature if we were to lose the Electoral College.
Thank you. Chip Curry, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. So I understand the sentiment of it, but it feels like we're trying to use the state Senate as a sort of minor league for national issues. And I really do not want to get bogged down in national issues. I want us to be focused, and I will be focused on Waldo County issues. So I would have to be convinced how this impacts Waldo County residents and how that is serving us. Because I don't want to, make broad, be fighting a national fight when our efforts really need to be here in Waldo County. So thank you.
Thank you. Charlie Pattavina, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thanks. I agree with my two colleagues here. It's very tempting to say, yeah, let's get rid of the Electoral College. I've wanted to do that my whole life. Hillary Clinton really ought to be our president. I mean, I think you could see from her life that, it would have been the natural thing. But to, hastily completely get rid of it when we've got other things we need to do. And I would just like to, put more thought in it. Clearly, it would benefit us right now, but the real goal is that whatever our system is, it should benefit as many Americans as possible for all time, not just the Democratic Party right now. So I'd want to give that some more thought, but as has been said, not get bogged down in it too much.
Okay, thanks. The next question is our first lightning round question. So we're going to be asking for a one-word answer. The question is long, but your answer will be short. Even though Maine has an established no excuse absentee voting system, there are serious roadblocks to voter participation. These loom larger given the pandemic. Maine's League of Women Voters is advocating a 4-point plan for the governor to implement for elections this November. It includes easier online registration, mail-in ballot options made available to all registered voters, safe and accessible in-person voting, and extended ballot counting deadlines. This is a long question, as I said, but would you please give us a one-word answer. Do you support or oppose these recommendations? Chip Curry, please answer first.
Support.
Charlie Pattavina
Support.
and Robyn Stanicki.
Support.
Thank you. Our next question. The current crisis has highlighted economic inequity in many ways, including access to online education. Many parts of rural Maine are without broadband internet access. How could the state address this? Charlie Pattavina, you go first.
Thanks. Well, one way would be with a community-owned utility. I mentioned Braintree, Massachusetts earlier. The other thing they do, and as I understand it, many community-owned utilities do, is provide broadband internet access. I realize it involves construction and wiring, and this has been talked about, for years. I think, we need funding for it. Some could come from the private sector. The other thing it has to be, though, is affordable. I don't know about you, but my cable bill is pretty darn high, and I don't even have fancy service at all. So, but if I didn't have it, we wouldn't be talking right now. So, yeah, I don't. There are issues we're all going to need to learn a little more about, and I'm not a one-trick pony, but this is one of my issues I'm going to learn more about. Basically, how the funding of it would occur, but it has to occur. We've talked about it long enough.
Thank you. Robyn Stanicki, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, short answer?
No, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks. I really like Charlie's idea of a consumer-owned utility that addresses internet access. I think industries such as higher education and other areas that really depend on a quality connection really could have some ideas about how to invest and how to start and fund a consumer-owned utility that gives us these services. I do think that it's important to learn more about the ways that other states perhaps are handling this problem. But I think that looking at Waldo County and understanding that only 77% of us actually have access to the internet really puts into play in these times of having to stay at home, who can actually access the tools to be able to work from home, who can access the tools to be able to go to school from home. And that also includes our children being able to learn from home as well. So it's an incredibly widespread issue that impacts us on many different levels. And I think that there's some ways that we can all work together with different stakeholders who have an invested interest in reliable internet access.
Thank you. Chip Curry, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Sure, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Not at all. The current crisis has highlighted economic inequity in many ways, including access to online education. Many parts of rural Maine are without broadband internet access. How could the state address this?
So the challenge of not having broadband is huge. It's huge in 3 different ways. It's huge for economic development. Everything I know about rural economic development says that broadband is a minimum requirement. If you're going to grow small businesses, if you're going to attract businesses, you need to have that as a basic. You need that as a bottom line thing. We're also seeing, my wife is a teacher, and she has got some students that can fully engage and others that cannot engage at all. And so I'm absolutely seeing it in education. And I've been seeing that as an educator with the university system, in students that were able to finish off this semester and look at online courses. And so the impact is huge for adult education and for child education. And then lastly, we're seeing now telemedicine. I just had my first telemedicine visit, and how would you do that if you didn't have broadband? So it's a huge issue. The exact solution, I'm not sure of, and I really want to look all over. I see, here in Belfast, I see that we have a broadband commission, and they're exploring options for building out broadband through grants and fundraising or grants and leasing those out in the future. Is that scalable to Waldo County? I'm not sure. but it is a goal that I have, that we have 100% broadband access. How exactly we get there, I'm not sure, and I'm open to finding out ways to do that.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support expanding ranked choice voting to all Maine elections? If so, how will you get it expanded? And if not, why not? This is a 2-minute question. Robyn Stanicki, you are first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. I do support ranked choice voting. I've always liked the idea of ranked choice voting, and I learned in social work that it's one of the ways that disenfranchised people can feel like they're getting heard. Oftentimes, we find that we cast our vote at the ballot box, and it simply goes counted, and then we don't realize that the person that we all really wanted to win is not the one that gets the seat. And so we feel like our vote isn't valued. Ranked choice voting does that for us because it gives us not one, but it gives us as many choices as there are people on the ballot. We can rank each person based on the feelings that we have about their leadership. And I think that it's really important to think about the value in that in ranked choice voting. You're ranking each person. And so you in fact have more than one choice in your vote. So to implement this on a wide scale, I think could be explored, but I think that we would have some challenges. We would have some challenges because we would need to be working in concert with other states. And I think a wide implementation of ranked choice voting, if we were to work in concert with other states, would be incredibly impactful. And we would find that we would have more engaged voters, we would have more interested, civically minded people, and we might also find that we're more satisfied with the outcomes of government and policy.
Thank you. Chip Curry, you're next. Go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
I'm a fan of ranked choice voting. I looked, as it came up, I can't remember how many years ago, I looked deep into it, and I love the idea of not having to make strategic votes. I can vote who is closest to my beliefs and not worry that I'm spoiling it and giving it to the person who is furthest from my beliefs. So I'm a fan of it, and how exactly to get it to a if we're talking a presidential level, I don't know how to get it to that level, and whether that would make sense, but or exactly how to do that. And it's a more of a national level issue and not a Waldo County issue so much. So I haven't put a lot of energy into that. I will say that for the state of Maine, I believe it takes a constitutional change. And so it's going to be a matter of putting it to the people. And I like that. I like if we're going to do something that's significant, it's going to be a matter then the body that has the greatest authority, which is the people, will be voting on it.
Thank you. Charlie Pattavina, you have the question now. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, thanks, but I understood you to mean, well, at first I thought it was going to be a lightning round question. I could just say yes, but then you asked how we could apply it to more elections. And I took that to be basically in Maine. And then Maine could lead by example, as we have in other ways with, of course, Romney Care in Massachusetts was modeled after Maine's Dirigo plan. But it's a great thing. It makes perfect sense. As Chip just said, it allows you to vote for who you want to vote for and not worry about the consequences because you get a second choice. And I don't honestly maybe I do. I understand why people don't want to do it for every election, but it would take a constitutional amendment. I'm in favor of that. But I think, as with so many things, we have to help more people understand the issue by being educated to it. I think there are a lot of Republicans who think we just want to do this because we're still angry that LePage got elected when blanking on his Elliot Cutler ran, who otherwise probably would have won if we had this then. But that's not why. This gives the little person an opportunity. You can have a third candidate who doesn't have a big party behind her, who has a real chance now, where currently they don't have much of a chance, or unfortunate circumstances would happen. So I definitely support whatever it takes, a constitutional amendment to apply it to every election that occurs in Maine, because I think currently it would not apply to our election, actually. But say, Sarah, would this be a good time to mention, I've got 30 seconds, that thing we talked about mentioning? So, well, I've got 30 seconds. I'll mention that all of us agreed to make a statement to let you know how important the clean elections process is to us. And it's so important to all of us, by which I mean all of us, but it's so important to the three candidates that each of us has contributed to the fund on behalf of all three of us. So we look forward to talking about that more later, but support your clean elections process, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. Next question. As we come out of the COVID economic crisis, how do you see the green economy assisting in the recovery? How do we make sure that we protect the interests of the most vulnerable economically in our communities? Chip Curry, this question goes to you first. You have 2 minutes.
Sure, thank you. It's really hard to predict where we'll be as we come out, and what our situation will be as we come out of this. So I feel like we're predicting where we will be in a month. Very hard to imagine where we will be in a year. And so how do we protect the things we care about? We protect them by valuing them. And so we walk into it and say, I care about protecting our most valuable, our most vulnerable people. How do we do this? How do we do this? And that's going to be our approach. It's going to be the test for each piece of legislation. For me, what it means is that, legislation always has a financial input footnote to them. And so it says, well, what is this going to cost the people of the state of Maine? For me, it's going to be, well, what is the cost to the most vulnerable? How is this bill supporting our values? I would be thrilled if we recognize that we need to invest in our people and we need to reset to a green economy. That we are going to, and how are we going to invest in those? We're going to set ourselves up for the next 20, 30 years. That would be wonderful. Where exactly that money comes from, how do we get that money? That's going to be the challenge. I would love to see us have national leadership on this because so much is going to have to happen at the national level. But how we do it is we value it and we take actions and votes based on that.
Thank you. This goes to Charlie Pattavina next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Maybe at this time I would, thanks.
Sure. As we come out of the COVID economic crisis, how do you see the green economy assisting in the recovery? How do we make sure that we protect the interests of the most vulnerable economically in our communities?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first part of the question, I see it assisting in the recovery in a huge way, because even if the pandemic hadn't happened, we're at a point where we need to be addressing climate change and doing things like electrifying, home heating and autos and so many other things. So, it's an opportunity to get low interest bonds and other funding to pump, just billions and billions into the Maine economy. And, there'd be a lot of good jobs, a lot of good union jobs, which in the sense of, a boon to the state budget would make us more able to help the most vulnerable. But, as with anything, it's our responsibility to take care of our less fortunate neighbors. Franklin Roosevelt was very good at helping people realize that, we have that need and that passion to take care of each other. So I think, along with the Green New Deal, we could look at the old New Deal, but, we should be able to generate tremendous amounts of money that will support people, give people good incomes, and the tax revenues will help us do what we need to do.
Thank you. Robyn Stanicki, this is your question next. Would you like me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Sure. As we come out of the COVID economic crisis, how do you see the green economy assisting in the recovery? And how do we make sure that we protect the interest of the most vulnerable economically in our communities?
I'm actually excited about this question because I think it poses a great opportunity for us. I think that we're in a unprecedented time. Although we have seen this time before, and Charlie made a mention that I think is really important, that we have been through something similar to this before. We have seen a widespread economic depression in the United States, and that we responded to in a particular way. That way was with a lot of care and compassion that created the New Deal, that created Social Security, that created a lot of social safety net programs that helped the vulnerable among us. And this was something that we did because we were all impacted equally by an unprecedented event. This was wartime. And you can certainly think about the COVID pandemic as something akin to the trauma of wartime, except it's not just impacting Maine, and it's not just impacting the United States. It's a global pandemic. So this is a global economic depression. And we really need to take global steps to make sure that our most vulnerable are taken care of. I think that it's also really important to think about national versus state policies. We are protected by federalism, which means that states have some independence in the policies that we're able to create to protect our people. So it's important to look to our national leaders to create fair and equitable policies that redistribute resources, but we can also do things as communities, as Waldo County, and as a state to be able to insulate ourselves from well-meaning policies that are either ineffective or just not reaching Maine the way that they should.
Thank you. Question number 8. You will need Republican votes to win a general election. What issues could you campaign on that would reach across the aisle? Charlie Pattavina, you have this question first. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Oh, thanks for that question. I've already actually spoken to a few Republicans, although right now we need to be focused on Democrats and independents. But I would say reasonableness. Mike Thibodeau lives down the street from me. And when he was first, I think he was my representative first, and then he was a senator and Senate president, from this seat that he narrowly beat Jonathan Fulford for, and then he became Senate president. Honestly, I didn't have a lot of use for the guy, in the beginning. But when I was president of the Maine Medical Association, we went to meet with him about the Medicaid expansion. And that's not like a natural thing for him, because he tends to view it as an entitlement that, might actually keep people down and not, trying to lift themselves up. But everybody needs help. Everybody needs help sometimes. Some people need more help at more times. And Mike actually agreed to meet with us knowing that the governor was going to rip a new one over it because, he would see his schedule and he knew what we were meeting with him about. And then he actually allowed people to come in to talk to the Republican caucus about the Medicaid expansion, which was the first time he had done that. So I think reasonableness is important. I think we all want the same kind of world. We just don't agree on how to get there sometimes. But, we don't have to have everything our way all the time. The Republicans don't have to have everything their way all the time. But we really have to be willing, to work with each other. And during my career, I've worked with a lot of people who don't agree with me and gotten quite a few things done. So, and I think there's so much opportunity for that.
Thank you. Robyn Stanicki, this is your question next. Would you like me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
You will need Republican votes to win a general election. What issues could you campaign on that would reach across the aisle?
This is a complex question because the divisiveness in our legislature is one of the bigger concerns in running for office. The Republicans that I've spoke to, and Charlie, I've spoken to a lot of them too, and they all talk about agendas and political games. I think a lot of people really have just we've dissolved trust in government. Republicans and Democrats alike are really concerned about the agendas that, that lawmakers may have with each other, and perhaps are not working in concert with each other the way that we could. There's simply not trust among members. There's simply not working together. And we know from polls that a large amount of Republicans and Democrats agree on outcomes, but we simply can't agree on the means to get there. Now, I think it's really important to understand that it's not just about who's right, but it's understanding what's right. And what I can bring to the table as a senator is in my experience in healthcare quality improvement. Now, some of the things that I do is I actually lead teams to look at what our outcomes are in light of our intentions. I look at some of the problems that we have, and we bring all of the people to the table that should have a voice in how to make changes so that we can see the results that we're hoping to get. I think that Republicans and Democrats can work together in this way because it can be incredibly challenging to create the relationships that foster trust so that we can understand that we're trying to work on issues that matter to the both of us, and that we don't have riders that are going to satisfy the other side of the aisle in order to get something done on this side. However, I am concerned about the efficacy of lawmakers and even my ability to get things done without the use of political games. I think that we need to take that off the table completely.
Sorry, having a dog emergency. Chip Curry, this is your question next. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, thank you. Appreciate it. So we are in a very divided district. It is entirely true. We are about split 50-50 between identified Dems and Republicans, with independents also splitting on both sides. So the issue is property taxes. We have common ground around property taxes. People feel incredibly challenged by property taxes. They're afraid that they're going to, in order to have the schools that they want, they're going to get priced out of their communities. And so we need to be championing, and we have common ground here. And one way to champion that is to get up to the 55% school funding level that the people of Maine have voted on countless times. And so that we're championing property tax issues. The second area that the Democrats have a very interesting challenge on is that we split urban rural. We need to champion rural issues, small town rural issues. So sometimes the solution that Cape Elizabeth Democrats are coming up with is not the solution for rural Waldo County. And we need to be that voice. And to be that voice, we need to know Waldo County. We need to know that the issue is, where the issues are, and so that we are championing that voice. So for example, we need to champion access to healthcare, not just can you afford it, and yes, can you afford it, and are you covered, but also, is there a doctor within an hour? How do we have access to healthcare and safe, so the whole healthcare system? And that's a very different issue for rural communities than it is for our larger cities. So I think that's how we attract them, is we focus on Waldo County and we focus on meeting the needs and making this a viable place for Mainers to live. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next question is another lightning round question. So this is a one-word answer. The question is healthcare a human right? Yes or no? Answer, please. Robyn Stanicki, you're first.
Absolutely.
Chip Curry, you're next.
Yes.
And Charlie Pattavina?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. Our next question is a 2-minute question. How do you intend to address the impact of the pandemic on municipal revenue sharing and local property tax rates in Maine, particularly with respect to school funding? This question goes to Chip Curry first.
Could you repeat that again, please?
Yes, sure. How do you intend to address the impact of the pandemic on municipal revenue sharing and local property tax rates in Maine, particularly with respect to school funding?
So the biggest challenge that we face is we can't create money. So how do we bring the money into Maine? how do we bond it? So if we borrow it for ourselves for meeting the needs right now, or you cut it. And that's the biggest challenge we have. Those will be the choices that the legislature and the governor will have coming forward. Is how do we grow the money by getting money from the feds, by bonding it, or how do we cut? And those are going to be the very painful, challenging decisions that will be forced to make. So how do we do it? We do it, and we'll be diving into it. If there are more solutions, I would be thrilled to hear more solutions, but that's my understanding of the choices we'll be facing.
Okay, this question goes next to Charlie Pattavina. You have 2 minutes.
Thanks. It's always a problem when you have, say, a tax cut at the state level, and some people think, oh, this is a great thing, they're cutting my taxes, and they, which certainly seems like a great thing, but sometimes people don't realize that that cuts other revenue as well. It results in less state money going to support schools. And I think, before people go celebrating, putting a cap on taxes or cutting taxes, they should really try to understand what that means in the big picture, because nothing is free, at least nothing like this. And, if you're getting a tax cut, the question ought to be, well, what am I losing in return to this? So, taxes have to be in the right place. People have to be willing to pay tax, including the wealthy. I think most of us are willing to pay taxes, and people need to understand what they're getting for their taxes, which is often a huge disconnect, in terms of not just local and state government, but federal government. So I don't have a specific plan, but I think, we just need to make sure taxes are where they should be. People, the middle class shouldn't be carrying too much of a tax burden, and certainly not people with less income. So the devil's going to be in the details, but obviously we need to support education.
Thank you. Robyn Stanicki, the question is yours. Would you like me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
How do you intend to address the impact of the pandemic on municipal revenue sharing and local property tax rates in Maine, particularly with respect to school funding?
I think it's important here to think about some of the points that Charlie's made, in that we really hedge tax increases in Maine, and we really don't seem to understand what we're losing when we cut programs and we refuse to increase taxes that fund really critical programs, including municipal budgets. Now, the city of Belfast just they released their budget plan. And in that, it showed that we really do have a huge budget deficit, and we had to make some really big cuts. Now, the challenge becomes that we just don't have the money here. And we know that we have amazing needs. I guarantee you, if I take 20 children and I line them up shoulder to shoulder, and I say 5 of these children don't have enough food to eat, and they have socks without holes, there isn't one person that's not going to be compelled to open up your wallet and give money to help that person get socks or to get food. We're already coming together as a community to try to meet needs, and we're already willing to do that. We embrace charity and we embrace community already as values that are important to us. And so the issue of our economy and creating the sustainable futures, even including education, by increasing municipal revenue, is really to take a multi-pronged approach, okay? So we need to find and recruit employers that are gonna fit in with the social landscape and the ecosystem of our coastal communities and our inland communities, because if we're not gonna get it from the states, we need to get it from our communities. And it's not that employers create jobs, it's that our community needs are creating jobs. And the stronger the need, the more job security we all enjoy, of course. So we've seen the way that this economic effect on the crisis has. We really need to look at more than one way to solve this issue. And that's going to be looking at different industries, being able to move in those new directions, and also trying to find ways to normalize and redefine who deserves and who gets the help.
Thank you. The next question. We have certainly not seen the last of legislation opposed to things like vaccination. And this may become an even more important issue in the aftermath of the current pandemic. Would you vote in favor of a science-based public health measure if a vocal minority of your constituents opposed it? Please explain your answer. Charlie Pattavina, you have this question first.
Guess that could have been a lightning round question, except for the explanation part. So if I understood you right, would we support a public health measure if it was opposed, even if it was opposed by a vocal minority of our constituents? So yes, and the 798 that was passed in the last session is a good example of that. I personally lobbied Erin about that bill, along with some other prominent people from Waldo County. And, you always struggle with something, and I understood her point on that. You'd struggle with the civil liberties aspect of asking people to put, or telling people to put something, well, it's sort of asking because they don't have to do it, but then the options aren't great if they don't do it. So you struggle with the idea of, requiring somebody to put something into their body or their children's body in particular. But there comes a point, people do have rights, but we also have responsibilities, and we have responsibilities to protect our neighbors. So I would say, and one of the problems with that vaccine question, and of course the recall, I was so proud of the people of Maine for understanding that issue, because it can be so hard to understand a referendum question to begin with, because you vote no if you want to keep it. And the people of Maine understood the issue. They understood how to vote. They understood that a lot of that vocal minority were presenting things that were, I'm sorry, they were just not facts. We're getting up here with like the 5G causing the COVID-19 disease, or the vaccine with the chip in it. So to answer your question, and I guess I just mentioned Chip's name, but to answer your question, yes, I would support it, but I would also seek to help the people understand it. Whether it's Medicare for all or whatever it is, it's not going anywhere if the people don't understand it.
Okay. Thank you. Robyn Stanicki, this is your question next. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, thank you. This has been a popular question as I've talked to some of Waldo County residents. I think it's important to think about, for myself as a woman, my take on it is that we've been passing legislation that regulates what I can do, put in and take out of my body for years. But I think that this vaccination question really calls into play this idea of body autonomy. Also, what I think it does call into play is it's important to understand that the folks that are concerned about vaccinations are fearful. And it's important to validate these concerns, that people have emotions. And I think that what I've seen in many of my conversations with people that have fearful emotions surrounding vaccines really come from stories of folks that have been injured by vaccines, or some people who have gotten sick after having a vaccine. So there's real concerns that perhaps statistics are being inflated, or simply being altered to push an agenda that may not be true. So what we need to do really is look at the fear that's surrounding this issue of vaccinations. I do support mandatory vaccinations to be able to go to school and to keep people healthy. And it's important to understand how a widespread positive impact can have over something that, really the statistics are telling us that less than 1% of folks are really having an adverse effect to vaccinations. I also think that it's very important not to call any of this trace. On the federal level, they're calling this, huge vaccination testing program called Trace, and I think that that's scaring a lot of people, because when you trace a call, you're getting lots of data, and very official. So really how you present something to the people, like Charlie said, is incredibly important to get the support.
Thank you. Chip Curry, this question is yours now. Would you like me to repeat it?
Please, would you?
Sure. We have certainly not seen the last of legislation opposed to things like vaccination. This may become even more important in the aftermath of the current pandemic. Would you vote in favor of a science-based public health measure, even if a vocal minority of your constituents opposed it? Please explain your answer.
Great, thank you. So on the values, it's hard to say what you would vote on, but yes, I'm going to lean towards science. I'm going to say this is what I value, and this is the, what is the best information, and and so I'm going to say yes to what the public health is asking for. There is a counter value that I also have, which is the ability for parents and individuals to make decisions for their own bodies and their own lives. And so my challenge on that front is going to be, I wasn't in the legislature when this last bill was passed. Was there another way to square it that allowed for more flexibility that still met the public health needs? I don't know if that was the case. I certainly talked with friends that had very specific concerns around the requirements and the timing of all the requirements, and they had beliefs of that different timing would be helpful and or less harmful to them or less risk to them. I don't know if there was more opportunity for common ground than the bill actually took. I can't say that, so I wasn't there, but I would look for that. I would look for, and I would be looking for those opportunities where those values could be more in line with each other. But yes, I would be leaning towards the public health science.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one more question before closing statements. Maine's citizen legislature is, as you know, part-time, and legislatures are paid only a small stipend. What do you think is the greatest benefit of our citizen legislature, and what do you think is its biggest drawback? Robyn, Stanicki, you have this question first, and you have 2 minutes.
I think the greatest strength in a citizen legislature is that anyone can be part of it. We can be part of it in a number of ways. You can be part of it as an engaged citizen because you can call your local representative and you can tell them how you feel about a particular issue. I can't say that you can actually get a line to your legislature or to their home phone number, for example. In many states, career politicians are making $50,000, $60,000 a year. The makeup of the people that are getting these positions can also be a challenge. If the legislature salary is only $10,000 or $14,000, you're really only getting a section of folks who can afford to serve. This can create a problem in accurately representing your area if the folks that are in Augusta are not also the folks that are impacted by the policies that you pass. And I think that one of the things that can become incredibly challenging is that the folks that are in Augusta have jobs of their own, have obligations of their own, and that can make it incredibly challenging for parents, for low-income folks, for people who simply can't afford to participate in government to be able to do so. And this is a challenge because this is also one of the reasons why we're really disenfranchised from government. We have a very rural county. We have a very high poverty rate. We have a lot of issues that prevent regular, ordinary Mainers from having a say. So citizen legislature is incredibly important in Maine. I'd love to see it in other states, but it means that we can become more engaged. But we can only become more engaged if we have the means to be able to do so. So for myself, I can be very concerned that I might not have the time to be the legislator I would like to be if I had to work full time.
Thank you. Chip Curry, this question is yours next. Would you like me to repeat it?
Please.
Maine's citizen legislature is, as you know, part-time, and legislators are paid only a small stipend. What do you think is the greatest benefit of this citizen legislature? And what do you think is its greatest drawback?
Mhm. So I think the greatest benefit is that anyone can serve, and with caveats. I don't think I have much of a different answer than Robyn's answer. It is accessible, and that people, especially if you couple that with clean elections, it is accessible. So it's not like I've got to raise $100,000 on my own in order to run. So it makes it quite accessible that people can run and serve. But I will be honest, in order to serve, it is a risk. It is a, how do you do this? For me, I will be quitting a job, and I will be looking for a half-time job that can be coupled with my service. And I am fully excited to be doing that. But yeah, we had to have a family discussion in order to say, can we risk that? It's with saving money for a child to go to college. Yeah, that's a big discussion. I will tell you one of the early things I found out, and it was my first question about whether we could do this, is there health care? Do the legislators get health care? By the way, they do. And so that was like, okay, we could breathe a little bit. This is a possibility. And very practical challenges. I think it does keep the legislation. I hope it keeps the legislation grounded in reality. I mean, we all get concerned about career politicians that lose their groundedness in the communities that they serve. I think it keeps us grounded with that. But yeah, not everyone can serve, but it does make it more accessible to some.
Okay, thank you. Charlie Pattavina, you have the floor. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thanks. Yeah, I don't disagree with my two colleagues here either. Healthcare was mentioned. That's fortunately I qualified for national health last year by turning 65, but it's a real concern. The problem with employer-related healthcare is, especially in a time like this, so many people losing it, but it stifles ingenuity and entrepreneurship. But in answer to your question, the chief strength of a citizen legislature is that it's a citizen legislature, and anybody can serve, as was said. The chief drawback to ours is, the long session is 5 or 6 months of very intense work. And I'm fortunate that I can work part-time, and I can work weekends during that time, and I can work lighter, and then I can work a little more the rest of the year. But most people can't do that. So I think that's a huge drawback to, people with typical employment jobs who would like to serve, and that's a problem. I would add too to what we said earlier. So I'm 66 now. I don't plan to be running for governor when I'm 74. So in terms of what I could say to Republicans, I don't have to be, I can be my own person and represent the interests of Waldo County and not worry about, falling in line politically, because I just don't have any aspirations to higher office. Clean elections was mentioned, so I'd love to say a few more words about that, speaking for myself now, but we all want to be part of this program, and it has ramifications beyond the primary. While it's not absolutely essential, but it would go a long way to ensure funding of the eventual candidate right up to the election. And for example, if Robyn is that candidate, I know she can't ask me for any more money because I already gave her $5. And Chip can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that with the donation today of $5, $10, or $15, you can have immunity from being asked for any more money by any of us right up until the end of the election season. So, please go onto the website and have a look. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for your thoughtfulness and your being so well prepared. It is now time for closing statements. Charlie Pattavina, please present your 1-minute closing statement.
So thank you again for hosting us today. As to borrow from Abraham Lincoln, he said it's time to think anew and act anew. Back I think that was his second inaugural address. Certainly new times now. And I'd like us to think about the many positives we can actually draw from this pandemic, because while it's a horrible thing, there are a lot of things that are positive about it, including the fact that we need each other and we need to take care of each other, and maybe we can do with a little less. And I'd like us to envision a world in which we work together instead of screaming at each other. I'd like us to wake up to headlines like COVID-19 finally on the wane. Many are getting vaccinated. The economy is in full recovery. There are jobs everywhere. Businesses are open. And we're prepared for future pandemics. So I don't know Robyn and Chip that well, but I believe they're good people. I signed their papers. I gave them $5. But if you don't think it matters to me who you vote for, it does, and it should matter to you. And I believe I have the experience, demeanor, and the right resume for the right time, and I humbly ask for your vote.
Thank you. Chip Curry, we are ready for your 1-minute closing statement. Please go ahead.
Thank you again for hosting this event. So I'm a small town rural Democrat. I want to focus on the issues that will impact Waldo County and our towns and our economic development. My priorities are around how do we make this, you're kidding me. We just shut down?
No, we can still hear you.
Everything else shut down.
Oh, no.
So priorities are, there we go, we're back. Okay. So my priorities are around rural economic development, having jobs that will pay the bills, helping people to get training for those jobs, bringing the community college system here to Waldo County so that people can get the training and technical skills and higher education right here in Waldo County. That is what a resilient, vibrant community looks like. We need to help people to have the jobs that will pay the bills so that they can build wonderful lives here. I've been around Waldo County for 25 years now, both interior and on the coast. I feel like I can build strong relationships. I have strong relationships all over the county. We have a strong team. This is going to be a big fight. This is going to be a big fight. We're going to need everyone here to be supporting the candidate to win this general election. And I'm asking for your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Robyn Stanicki, would you please begin your 1-minute closing statement?
Yes, thank you. I haven't been in Waldo County as long as Chip Curry, but I do understand the impacts of being in a rural, poor county. I grew up and I lived a life where I really had to struggle, and I really had to fight for everything that I've been given. I've worked really hard for my family, and I'm willing to work really hard for you. I'm not just tested, I'm proven, because I've made the kind of changes in my life that I'm willing to make for the people of Waldo County. I think that it's really important to have trust in legislature, and I'm willing to go the distance to work across the aisle to make sure that the change that we want to happen will happen for Maine. I'm excited to be able to work with the people, because I believe that none of us is as smart as all of us. And I really encourage you to research your candidates. I really think that Chip and Charlie are wonderful folks. I do have experience in concert with the two of them as both an educator and a quality person in healthcare. And I think that I do have great qualities for the job. Thank you very much for your support.
Thank you. That concludes our forum. I'd like to thank Engage Waldo for hosting the forum for the community to get to know the candidates for this important office. And thank you to Robyn Stanicki, Chip Curry, and Charlie Pattavina for participating. Finally, thanks very much to everyone who submitted questions for the forum, and to all of you who have attended today. We hope you enjoyed it. Take care, everyone. Stay healthy and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.